Chapter 38. In Dire Peril. Hold on, let me find my glasses. Chapter 38. In Dire Peril. During that desperate race, there was one terrible moment when Pinocchio thought himself lost. The Mastiff ran so fast that he all but caught him. The puppet could feel his hot breath upon his back and could hear his panting, but by good luck the beach was not far away, and toward the water he plunged. With a great leap, which saved him from the dog's jaw, he sprang into the sea. The Mastiff tried to stop on the edge, but carried forward by his impetus, he fell in after him. The unlucky dog did not know how to swim, so he began to thrash about his feet in order to keep afloat. But the more he kicked, the deeper went his head into the water. The first time he came up, gasping and strangling, he barked piteously. "I'm drowning! I'm drowning!" "Go ahead and drown," replied Pinocchio at a distance and see himself out of danger. "Help me, dear Pinocchio," wailed the Mastiff. "Save me from death." At this pathetic appeal, the puppet, who really had a kind heart, was moved to pity and turned back to the dog. He said, "But if I save you, will you promise not to chase me again?" Yes, I promise. But hasten, or I shall go under in another moment." Pinocchio hesitated. Then, remembering that his father had once told him that a good deed is never forgotten, he swam quickly to the drowning dog and, seizing him by the tail, soon pulled him out safe and sound upon the beach. The poor dog could not stand up his feet. He had swallowed so much salt water that he had swelled up like a balloon. However, the puppet did not care to trust himself too much to the Mastiff, so thought it prudent to swim out again. As he swam away, he shouted back, "Goodbye, Mastiff! Luck to you and all your family." "Goodbye, Pinocchio," replied the dog. "A thousand thanks for saving my life. You have done me a great service, and one I shall never forget. I hope I shall have the opportunity to repay it some day." Pinocchio swam on, keeping close to the shore, until at last it seemed a safe place for him to land. He looked at the sand and saw a sort of cave, and out of which poured a cloud of smoke. "There must be fire in that cave," he said to himself, "and so much the better. I will go in and get dry and warm. Then whatever happens, I'm ready for it." Having formed this plan, he drew near the rocks. But just as he was on the point of landing, he felt something beneath him in the water that rose and rose and rose and lifted him with it into the air. He tried to escape, but it was too late. To this great astonishment, he found himself caught in a huge net swarming with fishes of every form and size, all struggling like himself to get free. At this moment he saw emerging from the cave a fisherman who's so ugly that he looked like a sea monster. Instead of hair, he had bunches of green seaweed growing upon his head. Green was the skin of his body, green the color of his eyes, green the hue of his tangled beard, which fell below his knees. He looked just like a big lizard walking on its hind legs. As soon as the fisherman had drawn the net out of the water, he said with much satisfaction, "Ha! A fine catch! Today I shall have all the fish I can eat. Thank goodness I'm not a fish," said Pinocchio to himself, taking courage. The net full of fishes was carried back to the cave, which was gloomy and smoky. In the middle was a great pan full of frying oil, which gave out such a rank odor that it almost choked the puppet. "Now let's see what sort of fish we have," said the green fisherman, and thrusting his great flat hand, which looked like a spade, into the net, he pulled out a handful of mullets. There's Pinocchio, caught with a bunch of fishes. "Fine fellows," he said, feeling and smelling them, and eagerly, then he threw them over into a tub of water. He did the same thing many times, taking handfuls of fish out of the net, feeling them, and throwing them into the tub. And all the time he was smacking his lips and saying to himself, "What good white fish! What exquisite bass! What delicious soles! What choice crabs! What excellent anchovy!" The last that was left in the net was Pinocchio. When the fisherman picked him up, he rolled his green eyes in surprise and fear. "What sort of a fish is this?" he shouted. "I don't remember eating anything like this before." He looked him all over, turning him round and round, and then said, "Now I see. It must be a crawfish." Pinocchio was taken aback, and when he heard himself called a crawfish, and said sharply, "Crawfish yourself. Be careful how you handle me. You ought to know who I am. I am a puppet." "A puppet?" said the fisherman. "That's a new kind of fish to me. But so much the better. I enjoy eating you all the more." "Eat me? Don't you understand that I'm not a fish? Don't you see that I talk and think like you do?" "True enough," rejoined the fisherman, "and since you happen to be a fish that can talk and think like myself, I shall let you decide." "What do you mean?" "As a special token of friendship, I shall let you choose which way you want to be cooked. Would you like to be fried in oil, or would you prefer to be stewed in a pan with tomato sauce?" "To tell you the truth," replied Pinocchio, "if you give me my choice, I would rather be set free so that I can go back home." "You are joking. Do you think I would lose a chance to eat a fish as rare as you? Such luck doesn't happen every day to catch a puppet in these waters. Leave it to me. I shall fry you in a pan with all the other fishes. That ought to suit you. I'm so consolation. It's some consolation to have plenty of company when you are fried." At this, the unhappy Pinocchio began to weep and howl. "Let me go," he wailed. "Oh, if I had only gone on to school and not listened to the other boys. Oh, oh, oh." He wiggled and twisted like an eel, trying to escape until the green fisherman took a piece of a cord, bound him hand and foot with it, and threw him into the tub with the rest. Then the man pulled out a box of flour, dipped each of the fish in it, and put them in the pan to fry. One after another, they fell into the sizzling oil until at last it came the turn of Pinocchio. The puppet, seeing himself so close to death, and what an awful death, was seized with such a panic and shook all over so that he didn't have a bit of breath left to beg for mercy. The poor boy looked at his captor piteously, but the green fisherman, paying no heed to him, rolled him over in the flour so that he looked like a puppet made of chalk. Then he took him by the hand and Chapter 29. Pinocchio returns to the fairy. There's the bad guy. Chapter 29. Pinocchio returns to the fairy. Just as the fisherman was on the point of throwing Pinocchio into the pan, a large dog came into the cave, attracted by the odor of frying fish. "Get out!" cried the man threateningly, and waving the puppet all covered with flour. But the dog was as hungry as four ordinary ones, and whined and wagged his tail as much as to say, "Give me a taste of the fish, and I will leave you in peace." "Get out, I say," repeated the fisherman, and raised his foot to kick him. Now the dog was not one to be abused, especially when hungry, so he only growled and showed his teeth. Just then a small hoarse voice was heard crying, "Save me, Mastiff, save me, or I shall be fried alive." The Mastiff, for it was he, at once recognized the voice of Pinocchio, and great was his surprise to find that the voice came from the little floury parcel in the fisher's hand. Then what did the dog do? Why, he gave one jump from the floor, seized the floury parcel, and holding it gently between his teeth, dashed out of the cave like a shot. The man was in a towering rage at being robbed of the fish, which he so much desired to eat, and he ran after the dog. But it was useless race, and he had to be content with the fish that were left. Oh, ran the Mastiff until he came to the road to the village. Then he set his friend gently upon the ground. "How can I thank you enough?" said the puppet. "You do not need to thank me," replied the dog, "for you saved me first. I'm glad to be able to repay the debt. But if I reach that cave a minute later, let's not talk about it," said Pinocchio, shuddering. Brrr. It gives me the chills to even to think of what a narrow escape I had. The Mastiff laughed and stretched out his paws to the puppet, who pressed it warmly and in token of friendship. Then they parted company. The dog went home, and Pinocchio went along the road by himself until he reached a hamlet not far away. There he saw an old man seated in an open doorway, and asked him, "Can you tell me, sir, if you know anything about a little boy who was wounded by being struck on the head?" The boy was carried out to this hut, by some fishermen, and now he is dead, interrupted Pinocchio in great grief. No one, he was recovered and has returned to his own home. Truly, truly, interrupted Pinocchio in great grief. No one, no, now he was recovered and has returned to his own home. Truly, truly, cried the puppet, dancing with delight. Then the wound was not serious. No, but it might easily have been, for he was hit upon the head with a heavy book. Who threw it? One of his schoolmates, a certain Pinocchio. Who is he? They say that he's a bad boy and a vagabond, a good for nothing. It is not true, cried the puppet hotly. Then you know this, Pinocchio. Yes, by sight. What do you mean? What do you think of him? Asked the old man. To me he seems to be a pretty good fellow, fond of studying, obedient, and affectionate. While the puppet was making up this story, he chanced to touch his toes, and found that it was growing longer. Then in a panic, he commenced to cry. Don't believe a word I'm telling you, good man. I know Pinocchio very well indeed, and I can assure you that he is a good for nothing. He is lazy and disobedient, and instead of going to school, he gets into mischief with bad companions. As soon as he had said these words, his nose shrank back to its usual size. And why are you so white? The old man now asked. I'll tell you. I happened to rub up against a wall which had just been painted, replied the puppet, who was ashamed to admit that he came very near to being fried in a pan as a fish. And your clothes, what has become of them? I fell in with some thieves who stripped me. Please, sir, could you give me some sort of clothes so that I can go back home? Sir, my boy, but I haven't a thing except an empty bean bag. If you want that, you're welcome to it. Pinocchio did not wait to be urged, but took the bag gladly, and after cutting holes in it for his arms, he put it on like a shirt. Lightly dressed in this fashion, he started toward the town. But on the way, he did not feel easy in his mind. He paused from time to time, saying to himself, how shall I ever face the good fairy? What will she say when she sees me? Will she pardon me a second time? Oh, I'm afraid she won't. And it would serve me right, for I have not kept my promise to her. By the time he reached the town, it was nightfall. A storm came up and it rained very hard, so that he went straight on until he came to the fairy's house. But once there his courage failed him, and he went by without knocking. He came back to the door a second time, and again did not knock. Then he came back third time and did not knock. The fourth time he took a hold of the knocker, trembling, and let it fall with a light tap. He waited and waited, and after about half an hour, a window on the top floor thrown open, and Pinocchio saw a large snail, which gave a light on its head, looking out. What do you want at this hour of the night? Said the snail. Is the fairy at home? Asked the puppet. The fairy is asleep and does not wish to be disturbed. Who are you? Just me. Who is that? Pinocchio. Who is Pinocchio? The puppet who lives in this house with the fairy. Oh, I see, said the snail. Wait a little, and I will come right down. Harry, for Pete's sake, I'm I'm nearly frozen, my boy. I'm a snail, and snails never hurry. An hour passed by, then 2 hours, and the door remained shut. Then Pinocchio, being cold and wet, knocked again and louder. At this knock, a window lower down was opened, and the snail looked out. Beautiful snail, said Pinocchio. I I have waited 2 hours, and it seems like a year. Please hurry for Pete's sake, my boy, repeated the snail. I'm a snail, and snails never hurry. And the window was closed. After a while, it struck midnight, then 1 o'clock, then 2 o'clock, and still the door remained closed. Pinocchio lost patience and started to take the knocker for a resounding blow, when it turned into a live eel, which slipped through his fingers and escaped in a pool of water which lay in the street. Also, Pinocchio, cried Pinocchio with growing rage, if the knocker gets away, I shall have to use my foot. And drawing back a step, he gave the panel a furious kick. The blow was so strong that his foot went clear through the wood. The puppet tried to pull it out again, but couldn't succeed. The foot had struck as fast as if it were riveted in, and there poor Pinocchio had to stay the rest of the night, with one foot on the ground and the other in the air. In the early morning the door was at last opened. It had taken the good snail just 9 hours to come down the stairs, and it was covered with perspiration. What are you doing with your foot struck in the door? The snail asked, laughing. I'm in hard luck. Please see, beautiful snail. If you can get me out of this fix, I'm afraid it will take a carpenter to do that. Asked the fairy to help him. The fairy is asleep and does not wish to be disturbed. But would you leave me like this all day? You can amuse yourself by counting the ants that go by. Excuse me. At least you might bring me something to eat. I'm starving. Directly, said the snail. And after 3 hours and a half, Pinocchio saw it coming back and carrying a silver dish. In the dish were a loaf of bread, a leg of chicken, and 4 ripe apricots. Here is some breakfast sent you by the fairy, said the snail. At sight of this feast, the puppet began to feel better. But imagine his disgust on beginning to eat, when he found that the bread was plaster, the chicken was cardboard, and the fruit was colored glass. He wanted to cry. He wanted to give up in despair. He wanted to throw everything away, but instead he felt such a gnawing in his stomach that he fainted away. When he recovered, he found himself lying upon a sofa, and the fairy standing by him. I will forgive you this one time more, he said, but woe to you if you ever do such things again. Pinocchio promised faithfully that he would study and be good. And in fact, he kept his promise for the rest of the year. He came out first in the school examinations and behaved so well generally that the fairy was much pleased and said to him, tomorrow your wish shall be granted at last, and that is it, that you shall cease being a puppet and become a real life boy. You could hardly imagine Pinocchio's joy at this news so long desired. His friends were to be invited upon the great day for a fine luncheon in the fairy's house to celebrate the event. The fairy gave orders for 200 cups of coffee and 400 little sandwiches. The day promised to be a red letter one. But unfortunately, in the life of a puppet, there's always a but to spoil everything. There's your snail. And there's Pinocchio going to Bodyland.